Welcome everyone. My name is Faulkner. I'm the online event coordinator for staff development for educators. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today for Engage New York Math, turning scripted material into classroom success through targeted resources, grades K through 5 with Shannon Samulski. Before we start, there are a few things you should know. To allow for Shannon to be heard clearly, we do place all attendees on mute. Please use the window on the right-hand side of your screen throughout the webinar to ask any questions. These will be used for our Q&A period at the end of the presentation. The session is being recorded, and assuming no technical difficulties, you will receive a link to the archive within 48 hours, as well as a link to a certificate of participation. Finally, at the end of today's presentation, you will receive a short survey. By completing the survey, you do assist us in providing future complimentary webinars. Now, a little bit about SDE. At SDE, we believe educators have the most important job in the world, and that's why it's our mission to empower pre-K through 12 educators across the country with sustained professional development solutions that are not only research-based and rigorous, but also practical, innovative, and fun. Our goal is to help you create environments that prepare your students for the evolving demands of the 21st century. Together, we can create extraordinary classrooms. We're pleased to have Shannon Samulski joining us for today's webinar. Shannon is a respected educational consultant, special education teacher, and cohort leader with the Early Learning Success Initiative. Well known for her practical, ready-to-use strategies and enthusiastic speaking style, Shannon draws from many years of experience using response to intervention, data-driven instruction, and differentiation to ensure students learn and succeed. Her passion for the Common Core and deep understanding of Common Core math shines through in her confidence-building, upbeat, and idea-packed trainings. Welcome, Shannon. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar will be on Engage New York, looking at some of the strategies that we can kind of implement into our classroom if you are using them or not. A few resources that I have are for free on my website, which is posted here. It's 3 words, strategicinterventionsolutions.org. I have a lot of things in the free resource section that you can download. In addition, I have a blog, which is interventionsonthego.blogspot.com. I try my best to update that once a week with a new intervention that you can hopefully use in your classroom tomorrow. So I'll refer to some things in this webinar that are free on those 2 sites, and we'll post those again towards the end for you. What I wanted to start off the webinar with first is just to find out from the audience of people that are tuned in, how many of you are using Engage New York. So we're going to do a poll. Faulkner's going to set that up, and we're looking to see if you are currently using the program. What I mean by currently using it, it may not be that your school district has adopted Engage New York, but you may have a curriculum that you're using or a resource that you're using, and you may access some of the lessons from Engage New York. So if you're selecting A, it just means that you're using it, you're familiar with it, you've downloaded things and implemented it into your classroom. And then B obviously means not yet, but maybe your district or your school is planning on moving towards that. And C is just there's no plans really at this time to use it at all.
So that one's open, Shannon, and I'm going to give it another 5 seconds or so. All right. And I will let you know that 40%, which was the largest number, said that they're not yet using Engage New York, but will be. 37% said they are currently using Engage New York, and 23% said they had no plans at this time.
Okay, so that gives me an idea that some of you are currently using it or have used elements of it, and then some of you will be doing that, which is good that you're going to kind of hear a little preview about it before actually getting into it. For those of you that are looking and doing New York Engage or Engage New York, are you or are planning to be, so it would kind of be that 40% and that 37% of people, what best describes your training on Engage New York concepts? So either A, you've received no training. In many school districts that I go to, they may adopt this and copy the curriculum offline and hand it to you in a binder, and that's your training. You kind of get it, you talk about it, that you're going to do this. You would be the person kind of in the A. B would be you've received some trainings, but really less than needed, that you feel like you've started off and you feel like you need more. C is you received the right amount of training and you feel great, or D, it's just been so much that your head hurts, is over the top. So it really would be those people, not that 23% that would be answering this, but of that 40% and 30%, 37% if you could put in where you are with that.
Right, I'm going to give just another minute or so, moment to let the last few people in. Looks like we've slowed down. Okay. And are you sitting down, Shannon? So 74% of people who are currently using or planning to be, 74% have received no training whatsoever on Engage New York concepts.
Okay.
16% have received some training but less than they think they need.
Okay.
10% have received the right amount of training.
Oh, good. Okay.
And absolutely nobody has said that they've received more training than they need.
Okay. Okay. That typically is kind of what I think. I think it's typical in schools today that we give teachers, especially elementary teachers, when we teach, 8 different things during the day. Here's this math curriculum that you're going to be teaching, and you have no training on it, and it is very, very different from, the way that we teach. So when looking at this today, we're going to really kind of go through some of the pieces of Engage New York, but what I'm going to highlight the most to you are what have been new to the many teachers that we have worked with that are using it in their programming. So for a second, I just want to explain a little bit about the pieces that are embedded in Engage New York, and I want you to know that there's nothing for me. I'm not doing this webinar to promote Engage New York. I'm not a person that endorses Engage New York or any other math programs. I'm simply showing this webinar to really point out to you the things that are in it that are very different from the way that you teach and very different from the way that we've been taught to teach, and that you need to be able to embrace that to be able to do a program like this or to do the things the Common Core is asking. And so some of you may have tuned into my webinar that was on K2 looking at the 8 math practices. I'll be doing one on 3-5 coming up in June, but it seems a lot of the places that I go, whether I'm in my hometown area or my home state or out of state, that a lot of schools have looked at the Common Core standards as this top bubble, that they just understand the standards of what they're supposed to teach for their grade. So if they teach 4th grade, they know what standards they have to teach within fractions. And so a lot of people don't understand the 8 mathematical practices, and we're going to talk about those just for a little bit because it's really embedded in the Engage New York program. And so if you don't understand the 8 mathematical practices, they're an integral part of what the Common Core is saying. It's not just saying that we're going to teach, those standards. We have to be doing the 8 math practices in conjunction with the Common Core state standards. And so that basically means that we shouldn't be teaching any of those standards without using the 8 mathematical practices with it. Another part of Engage New York and as well as other math programs are performance tasks. Performance tasks are that execution of the 8 math practices being taught well with the Common Core. And so this looks at students' performance on story problems, but most importantly looks at their communicated reasoning for understanding why they know math, not that they just know math through a concept or a procedure that they've memorized. The next generation assessments, whether you're using PARC or you're using SBAC or you're using Inspire or you're using your own state design test, those tests are all going to be next generation assessments that are, especially if you're doing the Common Core, it's going to be looking at their in-depth knowledge of how well they're doing with concepts and procedures, how well kids are doing with problem solving, communicated reasoning, and then also performance-based tasks within it. And so I do a lot of work with numeracy development as it is integrated into these 3 things. But Engage New York, as well as many of the programs that are coming out, they have all of these things embedded. I have seen a lot of programs that schools are using that only look at the standards and are very rote-based, and a lot of schools that are just really missing the boat on these 8 math practices and really the rigor of what's going on in math. So the standards are really not meant to be a new name for the old way of doing business. I always say that typically with the state standards, we've gone a mile long. Even from when I learned math, we've gone a mile long, but we've had standards that have been thrown at us and crammed down our throat that we have to get through it as fast as we can. And really with the Common Core, we're saying we want to go a mile deep and really make sure that kids understand the concepts that they're learning in a really an application-based way, that you don't just know how to do the butterfly method for math to figure out the problem, but that you really can explain to somebody why they do that. So I'm going to use Engage New York as an example. It is a free program that's online that many districts turn to because of funding, and obviously there are other programs that are out there that are really great as well. that involve these different things. But my struggle is that I have a lot of districts that I work with that have EngageNY and they haven't received any training, and so it becomes very overwhelming. So we're going to kind of break down the elements of EngageNY, and then we're going to talk about, I'm going to pull out different lessons that are in there and really talk about the things that are in there that you may not completely understand. So the premise or the purpose of what they have in there is really to go in depth on fewer topics, which is part of what Common Core is all about. It's to integrate rigorous classroom reasoning. It's to get kids to start talking about how they're thinking of math instead of us blazing through 30 problems on a page. We want kids to be able to talk about numbers and their thought processes behind why they think what they think. It has a lot of extensive problem sets, which are similar to what the next generation assessments have, and it has a high expectation for mastery. And so one of the things that is nice when we're looking at formative assessments is EngageNY has the formative assessments embedded in it. Some districts, when they first start looking at it, they have common assessments, which a lot of times common assessments, I see them where schools give the common assessment at the end of a period of time that kids are supposed to have learned something, and that the teacher knows that Johnny's failing. She gives them the common assessment and finds out that Johnny is still failing, and she goes on and he goes on and continues to teach the way they've been teaching. And that isn't formative. You know, if you're not using common assessments to help drive your instruction, if you're just collecting data to collect data, it's not going to have an outcome of changing your teaching. So a lot of what is laid out in EngageNY, which is actually one of the features that I do like, is that it has mid-module and end-of-module assessments or formative assessments to see where your kids are, and then it also has an exit ticket after every lesson. So an exit ticket can be given to the children, and immediately that when you go home that night, you know whether or not your kids have gotten the concept that you were teaching in that application way versus the rote way or not. And so it really provides this nice cyclical process of assessment, doing an analysis, and then your action plan can kind of change. And so it's sort of coined after that process of what we know that we use in school improvement and other things to help generate change. I can tell you that if you are of that percentage that will be using EngageNY, I will tell you that you will go through these emotions of these clip arts that I've kind of picked out. I've worked with the 3 districts in particular, one of which is very large, and it is very overwhelming when you first get it because it's very scripted. And I think a lot of us, when we first look at a program that is scripted in the way that EngageNY is, we sometimes as teachers find it offensive that, you know, I have all these teaching degrees, I don't need someone to tell me exactly what I should say and what the student should say. And so it's completely normal to feel like you're looking at this and you feel a little bit like a puppet. It is nice for some teachers who are new because they can look at that and kind of know exactly what they're supposed to do. So it literally, this is a sample out of it. It says teacher says, student says, you know, student says 5. How many slots are in the bottom? Student says 5. Take out the objects out of your bag. And so I think what happens is a lot of teachers open up this program and they say, oh my gosh, you know, I have to say every single thing that the teacher says and the student says. And as you're getting to know you just know that this is scripted in a way that might not be your style of teaching. And so many people are turned off by it when they first look at it because of that. This normal reaction is to look like this person here where you feel like you're going to pull your hair out because you're thinking, if I have one more new thing thrown at me as an elementary educator, I'm just going to lose my mind. And so, you know, it's really hard to not look in that lens of feeling overwhelmed if you don't have any training on it because you're literally sitting there. In fact, one of my teachers said to me, Shannon, I feel like I need to have a podium, you know, up a music, you know, like music would lay on, and have that binder there with me so I can read exactly what I need to teach. And that isn't a natural way of teaching. Many teachers look at the lessons and they have a 60-minute time period on them, and they take you, for those of you that do this know what I'm talking about, takes you 4 days to get through one lesson, and the module may have, you know, 30 lessons, and you're doing the calculations in your head and you're saying there's no way I'm ever going to get through all these modules by the end of the school year. And so you literally feel, we feel as teachers, there's this clock chasing us, you know, are you on this chapter, or you got to that section? I have to at least expose them to the things that will be on the state test. And so we get back into that way of dragging kids through curriculum and math, and that's not really really what it's intended for. So if you are new to any curriculum, you do have to go slow to go fast, but that you can kind of take, a step back and you do feel, completely overwhelmed, but let yourself take a step back and kind of look at the way that this is teaching and recognize and embrace that this isn't the way that we learn to teach math. It's more than likely the way that you didn't learn math this way as you were growing up. You want to look at this as you're not, with the Common Core, going to go at blazing speed to cover the content anymore. It's not about getting through every single piece of the content that you have to teach. It's really more about, am I teaching my children these concepts to the point of application, real-world application, so that it's actually relevant to them. The hard part with this is you have to make a change, of teaching instead of through showing, or instead of, through telling. You want to be able to have kids show you their learning. And like I said, you're not going that mile long anymore. We're going that mile deep. And so, when we went to school, there was one way to get an answer, and there was one answer to a problem. And really, in what we're doing at the Common Core, there's one answer, but there's lots of ways to get there. And so that's really a part of what is in this program. The framework of EngageNY, if you aren't familiar with it, there is, it's pretty, set up in a way that is user-friendly. It's fairly, in my opinion, very paper-pencil driven. I do a lot of application and hands-on things to do the things that the 8 math practices are saying, but it is laid out in a particular way. So at the beginning it has fluency practice every day. There's application problems. So a lot of the schools I work with, they use number talk as a part of their fluency practice. So you may open up and see that there's 5 different things that it tells you have all of 4 minutes to do the fluency practice, and by the time you're working with your first graders and get the items passed out that's required for the fluency practice, you realize that 10 minutes has gone by. So look at that fluency practice and try to pull back and say, what is these concepts trying to teach in the fluency practice? You don't have to go word for word if you don't need to, but you could do a number talk using something that would bring in that idea of fluency practice. It's going to have an application problem, which I particularly like. With the application problems, they are a lot of times driven in a way where kids have to show their communicated reasoning or problem solve through it. And so a lot of teachers make this part of their math journaling problem every day, that you get into math journaling and have that as a part of it. So people kind of have already carved out that fluency practice can be done during number talk, which is kind of modeled after Sherry Parrish's work with looking at that 7 to 10 minutes a day that you can work on number talk. And the application problem is used within their math journaling. And then you have what's the big part of it, which is the concept development. They'll have a practice set with independent practice, student debriefing, and exit ticket and homework. And so in each module, in each lesson, it has a suggested lesson structure. So just know that if your kids need more time on the application problem, more than their 8 minutes that they're allotted, that they need to have that time to be given it. And so as you see kids in the exit tickets getting some of those things, you could move on instead of feeling that you are that you're really going through it. You want to make sure your kids understand the program or understand the concepts that you're teaching. I actually had a teacher that was really doing EngageNY, and she said, I'm going to do this program with absolute fidelity, Shannon. I'm going to teach this program exactly the way it says in the first grade program, so that the second grade teachers are feeling that I did my job, and that my first grade kids feel good about what's going to be happening in second grade. And so she went at blazing speed through EngageNY and went at a speed that she was covering everything the way she was supposed to. And so a lot of my other teachers were only on Module 2, and she was already on Module 3, and I said, wow, I can't believe probably I have about 250 teachers or more that are using EngageNY. I said, I can't believe that you're on Module 3 when everybody else is really on Module 1 or 2. And she goes, oh yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing it with great fidelity. I'm going page by page, reading that script and teaching the program. And I said to her, well, how are your kids doing, Sally, in the program? And she goes, oh, they don't get it. She goes, but I'm just continuously going. And so, there's that idea of blazing through it in the 60 minutes. And any person can pick this up and teach it. But do you have the skills to be able to change your teaching to get the idea of what the Common Core is saying? And a lot of times we don't have the training that we need to do that well. Anyone can pick this up and kind of go word for word and teach it. But if your kids aren't getting it, then what is the purpose of us doing it? So one of the main things that I'm going to talk about first that's in Engage New York and in most programs is the 8 mathematical practices. And I honestly see a lot of elementary schools just that they aren't familiar with the 8 math practices, and I spend a great deal of time in trainings, and so does SDE, of really embracing the 8 math practices and getting schools to understand that when it says look for regularity and look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning, that it's not another language that we're talking, that actually means something in an elementary classroom. And so I have a lot of posters on my website as well as my blog that you can download. Don't go on Teachers Pay Teachers and pay $1 for a poster. There's a lot of really great kid-friendly posters that are out there for free that you can use. But the Engage New York program actually does point out that that you're doing the 8 math practices. So if you're not familiar with the 8 math practices and you're given Engage New York, you really need to take a step back to figure out what the 8 math practices are. In the lessons, it will point out to you on the side MP7, and many teachers don't know what that means. Why does it say MP7 here and this one says MP6? These are math practice 7. So what you're saying, even though this is very scripted and very exaggerated as it's written out, this is encompassing what 8 math practice 7, and 8 math practice 7 is look for and make use of structure, which is kind of seeing a pattern or connection. In this particular lesson, they're working with number bonds and they're talking about this. So math practices are embedded throughout the Engage New York, so you want to make sure that you know what those are, and when you're teaching them, you know what they mean in a kid-friendly way if you're teaching 4th grade or if you're teaching kindergarten. So in the beginning of every module, it's going to tell you which of the math practices that particular module will focus on the most. So in this particular module that I pulled out of, it's working on math practice 2, 3, 5, and 6. And so you want to be really familiar with what that looks like in your classroom because it's going to be used within the lesson. And so a lot of teachers that don't know what the math practice is, they'll teach a lesson, whether it's in Engage New York or another program, and they don't realize that they should be using the math practices as they go along with that. So, even though Engage New York has lots of things in it that, are scripted, I always say that district purchased or district given piece of resource that's given to you is not the Bible for teaching. It is the train. It's the train that you're on as a school so that you're comparing apples to apples and you're using the same type of resource. Know that with any program I feel that's out there, you have to supplement in some way. In reading, we don't have a program that teaches us every single thing to teach a child to become literate and to be, deep in their comprehension. It's the same thing with math. We need to have a program that has us on a train, but knowing we have to look at where our kids are to do things. So just doing the math practices in the scripted way as this is one way to get the math practices as you're doing it, but there's lots of great games that you can play to get kids the idea of how to do it. And so one of the things that I recently published is strategy games that a lot of people are familiar with that you would use that would bring in the 8 math practices. And so one of them is called 9 Holes. I have a CD that's out on my website that you can download that will help you with getting the 8 math practices. It goes really great with a workshop model if you're using Engage New York or any other program that you can get the idea. So for this particular game, it's a 2-person game. This is a game that I'm showing you because you could use it without buying anything. You could just do it with regular paper. But it's 2 people, and each child needs 3 chips of 2 different colors, and you need a game board of some sort. Some kids just play on a game board that is literally on a dry erase board. You don't have to have the fancy game board to go with it. But I'm going to show you here on the hover cam how we would play. We have the strategy game here where we have 3 yellow chips and 3 red chips. And so this game is similar to tic-tac-toe. We're going to play it on all of the intersections that you see here on the board. And so as we're playing this game, we want to try to get 3 in a row, either across, up and down, diagonally. In the way that I play 9 holes, you can put your chip wherever you want. The only difference in this game is once a chip is laid, you can. It's not like in tic-tac-toe when you put an X down, you can't move it. In the game 9 holes, it's a continuous movement game until you win. Now, I don't really have a friend here that I'm playing with, but I'm going to show you kind of how it would start off. So if I was red and I went in the middle, I would want to get my chips off the starting point and put them in any of the intersections as we're going through. And I'm going to try to get 3 in a row. Yellow is going to block me, where red is going to block me. And so right now, all of our chips are on the board. And so strategies that come in when using the 8 math practices and the pieces in the EngageNY that bring out the 8 math practices is getting kids to start to think about math in their own way, to start to use strategies on their own. And so a child would, have to know that we have to go up here to block that person. So is it the best idea for me to move this chip up here? No, because I may have blocked them, but they're going to win over here. And so kids have to strategically look at this board and figure out, which chip should I move to kind of block that person. And so the yellow may go here now and try to block as the red might, knowing that if I were to go off of this on accident, that my friend can go over here and end up winning the game. So what you're trying to do with this game, which is what EngageNY is doing, and that samples where it says MP7 or MP6, is that they're wanting kids to be able to use those math strategies as they're learning. So this game in particular is just called 9 Holes, but it's a great game that you can use along with certain things that they're using in EngageNY to get kids to kind of learn those concepts with it. So this game again is a 2-person game. You don't need a whole lot of materials to do it. You really could just draw this board on here, but what you want to connect with that lesson that you're teaching and with the game that you're playing is which of the 8 math practices are we using when we're playing a game like that. And if in this game kids are modeling with mathematics because they're moving their chip to try to get 3 in a row. They're constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others because they're talking about, if I were to move here, that might not work, or you moved there and I have an open spot, or I double blocked you, and so I'm going to win no matter what. Kids have to use practice 1 because they have to keep going. They have to use the tools strategically. You have to be precise in this game or you may lose. So this particular game uses 7 if not 8 of the 8 math practices and goes along with really what the program is saying here with some of the things that they're doing that might say MP7. So some teachers start off using the 8 math practices, if you're unfamiliar with them, using strategy games as you go. In addition, EngageNY has the beginning of every module the terminology that you're going to use. As you know, in the Common Core, vocabulary is key, and so if we don't have the kids using the right vocabulary, they're not going to get it. I walked into a kindergarten classroom a few weeks ago and a little girl came up to me and she said, "This is Samulski, we are composing and decomposing numbers," and she had her hands moving in different directions, and I said, "What does composing and decomposing mean?" And she used her hands. They had a little hand motion that talked about we're putting numbers together and we're taking them apart. And so we need kids to be familiar with that terminology. And so on my blog, I think it's back from like March 2013, I have math word walls that you can download that I had gotten for free offline that I posted. But you want to be able to have vocabulary and terminology to go along with your EngageNY if you're using it. So, for example, Module 1 might be on geometry, and you want to be able to have all those terms that go with geometry with it, as well as other games and things that you might add to it. SDE offers different trainings looking at 8 math practices and how to apply them into your classroom and really starting to get a math culture going. If you don't have training on the 8 math practices or how to teach through showing versus telling a procedure, I would highly recommend before getting into EngageNY that you make that paradigm shift. It's a hard paradigm shift to apply the 8 math practices because it's not something we're completely used to, especially when we're used to going very procedural through math. So one of the modules help make it real, applying the 8 math practices and then creating a math culture through reasoning. And all professional development that we do at SD, as well as what I do, is with a lot of job embedded coaching. It's not about hearing about the 8 math practices, but as much as seeing it modeled with curriculum. So if you're using math expressions, or if you're using everyday math, or if you're using investigations, or if you're using EngageNY, what does it look like to apply the 8 math practices while I'm teaching that? And so that makes up, good professional development. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lesson. I just kind of picked one, kind of just random from, a variety of them from kindergarten through 5th grade. And I'm going to highlight some of the things in the lesson and some of the things that I would say that if you're new to it that you may not have heard of or know exactly what some of the tools are that go with it. So one of the ones that I pulled out first is from EngageNY first grade. It's in Module 1 and it's in Lesson 1. And the objective for that lesson, that whole module really is all about sums and differences to 10, which is a huge part of what first grade is teaching. And in this particular lesson, they are doing analysis and describing embedded numbers to 10 using 5 kind of as the anchor number and grouping number bonds. So some of the things initially in kindergarten in EngageNY, children need to be familiar with subitizing. Many of you might be familiar with subitizing, but it's that instant recognition of number quantity. And so in the kindergarten program, it introduces subitizing, and then in the first grade program, it's going to do a lot of things with that within number bonds and certain things. And so if you're not familiar with what subitizing is, that's something if you're a kindergarten, first grade, second grade teacher that you're going to want to become familiar with, which is being able to look at a number group and to be able to instantly say, so if we looked on this particular worksheet that's in New York Engage 5 and 4, how many altogether, you want to be able to say, 9 if there's a group of 5 and there's a group of 4. It's important too, when I look at EngageNY, it's very paper pencil. I have to think about what are some fun application games that I can play that will help my kids understand numeracy. So even though you have this program that's scripted and has a lot of things, you have to be dynamic to know how to change your teaching to make it more more interactive. I have created a subitizing screener that I published a couple of years ago that's on my website, Strategic Intervention Solutions. And so a lot of the schools that I work with, especially in kindergarten and first grade, that are using EngageNY, we take them through my screener. One of them is looking at how well can a child subitize a 5-frame, a 10-frame, an array, or a scatter, which is part of what's on the Common Core for kindergarten and first grade. There's a parent letter in it. But what happens is, when you get into a program like EngageNY and you're not really sure where your students are with subitizing, a lot of times we can group kids and understand where their level of numeracy is. Not in a digit, not memorizing 8, that 8 is 8, but do you understand what 8 is made up of? In addition, when we talk about number bonds, I have another subitizing screener that looks at understanding combinations and missing parts. We get so quickly into the algorithm, and with what the Common Core is saying, it's really about their deep knowledge. Is it important to do mad minutes and to make a child panic, looking at 6 plus 2 as fast as they can and saying that it's 8? Or is it more important that they understand what that bond of that number is, at the part whole, that when we look at a number like 8, and I were to maybe cover that 8 and see the 6 and the 2, can the child instantly subitize and say that that number is 8 because there's a group of 6 and there's a group of 2? I find in a lot of the field studies that I do that kids are not familiar because we have thrown these math facts fast down kids' throats when they're not really ready for it. And so EngageNY really I think does a decent job of looking at that subitizing is important, that we need to teach that in kindergarten, and that is the foundation for kids and their number sense as we look at that. So the particular screener that I have, you can look at it on strategicinterventionsolutions.org in the shopping area. There are a lot of tools that support subitizing that you will need if you're doing EngageNY. And so if your district is getting this program for free, I really push schools to say, is there a kit of some sort that we can get to help our teachers to be successful? So some of the things that are in the program are using a Rec and Rec, and Crystal Springs sells Rec and Recs. We get them for schools, a class set of them, and we have a giant demo Rec and Rec. These are really great to help kids not memorize just those facts in the abstract form, but to help them have a concrete or a pictorial representation of what is being asked. Something new that's come out is subitizing cards, which I love. They're very fun for kids to look at a group of cards and have kind of understanding with what that quantity is. There's 10-frame cards. Manipulative in a book that I have designed is called My Counting Buddy, which is a macrame beaded counting buddy. These beads actually push down on his body, There's a Counting Buddy Junior and a Counting Buddy Senior. The one pictured is the Counting Buddy Junior. But a lot of the activities, when you're looking at Engage New York, you're thinking, wow, there's 5 activities for fluency that I have 4 minutes to complete. You know, could I do that concept with a Rec and Rec, or could I do that concept with the Counting Buddy and get that same concept across to my students? And so a lot of teachers will order these items to go along with the kindergarten, first grade, even some of the second grade pieces bring in some of these things. So there's a lot of great tools. The Counting Buddies on my website, but Crystal Springs sells a lot of great things with our Singapore math line that really align. There's a lot of Singapore math things aligned inside of Engage New York, which is a similarity there. So one of the things in this particular lesson that I pulled out is number bonds. Number bonds are used continuously through Engage New York from kindergarten all the way up through 5th grade. Even when we're looking in 4th and 5th grade at fractions, they're using a bond of what the whole number 1 is. And you know, the whole number 1, if you're looking at certain things, would have a number bond maybe of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That's the number bond to total that number 1. So number bonds are just basically numbers that can be broken into pieces to make computation easier. A lot of times you've heard of fact families. You know, every program uses a different name for it, but the number bond concept is used in the Engage New York because it really helps kids understand the parts of the numbers instead of memorizing that fact, so that when you see the total of 5 and 2 and 3, or even if I was in a 4th grade classroom and we were looking at multiplication and I had 35 up here and I had the 2 products of that number, it's the same idea. And so if you're not familiar with number bonds and how to get kids to understand those, that's something you're going to want to familiarize yourself with if you are one of those people that are going to be using Engage New York, because if it's going to constantly say that. And so I think some of the trouble I see is in some of the districts that have adopted this, they did it blanketly. They didn't like have a rolling adoption, and so our 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers are really struggling with implementing Engage New York because they haven't had some of these precursor pieces early on in it. There are lots of different number bond products out there. A couple of my favorites are the iPad apps that look at the multiplication, division of number bonds, and then also addition and subtraction. So versus having kids drill and kill on the math facts, it's more important for them to understand the concepts of how that number can be broken apart. And so the number bond cards, you know, obviously here are for addition and subtraction and multiplication and division. These ones go up to combinations to 100 for the multiplication division. These ones go up to combinations to 10. So those are other products that are good to go along with those if you don't have it. Something else in the Engage New York, one of the other lessons I pulled from is Module 3 in 2nd grade, which is looking at place value, counting, and comparisons of numbers to 1,000. The lesson 6, the objective is to write base 10 numbers in expanded form. And so this particular lesson uses something called place value cards or place value strips. And so a lot of people that are new to this are not used to using place value strips because we usually teach place value with place value blocks, and we don't use, you know, discs to go with them. And so one of the things you want to be familiar with is how to use the discs, or how to use the strips. So some of the things that you can do with the place value strips are, you know, looking at the place value basics, figuring out more or less, rounding, ordering numbers. You want kids to be able to use these strips in many ways so that they do understand that the level of what, you know, kind of we're learning. So you have, you know, as I remember doing rounding, you know, my teacher said, look at the number to the right. Is it 5 and higher, 4 and lower, round up, round down? And I got really confused as to what that meant because it was always sticking in the abstract. We teach kids so much in the abstract level, but we don't go back to this pictorial or even the hands-on concrete enough to help kids to really understand the concept behind why we're doing this abstractly. And so one of the things that I really like using is the place value strips, and these are used continuously as well in the Engage New York program because it really gives kids kind of a hands-on approach for this. So if we were to look at this number, 4,326, the kids are able to use these particular strips and they're able to pull them apart as they're using them to make different numbers. And so they're understanding place value a little bit more. And so we'd want to, you know, pose different questions to them, such as, you know, what is the value of the 3, for example, in this number? We know that it's 300, and if you don't know, you're able to see that there actually is a 300. That's not a 3. What is the place in what place is the 6? The 6 is in the ones place. Which digit is in the hundred place, or in the thousands place? We have the the 4. So getting kids to read the number correctly and then be able to have them read it in expanded form so that they know that 4,000 plus 300 plus 20 plus 6 is what is derived of making our number 4,326. Place value strips also can be used and are used in the EngageNY program with being able to build a number and then to change it to make it more or less. So if we have the number here, 7,415, can you show me what 10 more than that number is? And so kids are interactively using these strips to do these things. So making that number 10 more now changes that number to 7,400. There's a little bit of a glare there. 7,425. If I wanted a child to change this number maybe and make it 200 less, they're going to pick up, where is that, where is the 100 spot? I'm going to pull that out and I'm going to be able to change that and make it 200. Typically when we're doing place value, we do expanded form in a lot of these processes with pencil and paper, and kids memorize that procedure that you've taught them on how to do it. But when you can have hands-on manipulative like the place value strips, it helps make better sense of it. For example, if you're looking at a number and you're wanting, let's say now that I have this number and I wanted to say to you, show me 80 more. A child's going to be looking to try and find that 8 and realize that, 80 more, they're going to have to do something, and that these zeros really have a meaning in the place value of numbers. And so kids get the idea of how to arrange those numbers in different ways. Same thing if you were to say, as they were looking at these numbers, round this number, let's say, to the nearest hundredths place. The kids can see clearly with these colors that the hundredths place is in this orange color, and a lot of times we're looking to say, look to the right, is it 5 and higher, 4 or lower? Kids can look at this and really help them, move to the side, and they realize that there's, what is between 200 and 300? If I'm at, 225, where am I with that? A lot of kids, the program also uses a lot with the abacus. I'm a big fan of the abacus. On my blog, I have my Shannon's Popsicle Abacus that you can make for under $1 that I recently posted. But getting kids to be able to look at, if I'm at 25, is it closer for me to go back to the 200 or to go up to 300? And so when you're doing these things with ordering or estimating, things like that, you can use the place value strips to really help you understand that. So if I was new into this program looking at this, that would be something I'd want to be familiar with how to use. The place value strips is used throughout, so it's not just something that you learn in first grade and then you don't use it, or you learn in second grade with place value, but how do you use. We teach kids the distributive property when we're looking at multiplication, but a lot of times it's very paper pencil driven. So how can you show it concretely or pictorially with a hands-on object? And so, looking at the number, 3 times 233, you actually have that 233, and they can pull out the 200, the 30, and the 3, and they can make their way through that problem of looking at really what we're looking at as we start to get into algebraic equations, but they can really pull out to see that 200 times 3 is 600 and so forth. So we have lots of place value strips in addition to decimal strips. The EngageNY also uses these decimal strips. The ones that I was actually modeling for you under my HoverCam is the student set, and it's really nice. They have a package that comes, so you don't have to copy it on color paper and laminate it and cut it out and get it in baggies. They actually have a set now that Crystal Springs sells that a lot of my schools use that has 30 sets already ready, and they're kind of mini sets that the kids can use, and then it comes with a demo set that you can use for your classroom. So when you're using the numbers 1 through 1,000, they also have these, obviously they go all the way up to 1,000,000, and they're different colors, as well as these it'll, in the 4th and 5th grade or 3rd grade when you're looking at decimals, they also have strips where they're building numbers and keeping the succinct idea with those as well. So EngageNY also uses the place value discs in a lot of their lessons, and so if you're not familiar with using the actual discs, those are something that you're going to need. And it's really hard. A lot of schools, you have copies of them and you're trying to cut them out and things like that to do the lessons. But if you read right here in the directions, it says model the number with your place value chart using the fewest numbers of blocks or discs. And so they have to use the discs to build 12, use the discs to build 124. This one says take turns using number discs to model the following numbers with the fewest discs possible. Whisper your numbers, in standard form units. And so they have a lot of this in here. And so if you aren't familiar with using place value discs, which a lot of teachers aren't, you kind of have that non-proportional and the proportional way of looking at place value. The proportional way would be looking at base 10 blocks, or place value blocks that we're used to using that have the 10 rod, and we used to call them skinnies and bits and flats, and you do different things with those. But this particular, the discs, use a non-proportional way to help kids kind of understand, so that when you're building these on you usually have a place value mat that you use. When you're using the discs, you don't actually have the labels at the top, so you wouldn't have 1s or 10s because you don't want it to look like there's 10 10s. It's just 1 10. So you would have them build these with the place value chips or the place value discs, so 17, and the child would physically add the 25 on and figure out that regrouping together. And when you're doing this, there's lots of ways to act this out, as you're looking at it. Same thing as if you were to look at, in this example, I've kind of, in one of our trainings, we model out 42 minus 25. So the child would build on their place value. I'm going to start off with 42, and with the actual strips, we've built the number 25. And so we're really slowing down this process so kids are understanding that it's not about, let's go into the ones column and, oh, we don't have enough. Let's knock on the door and ask our friend next door, can I borrow one and bring it over to this side? Kids learn that very rote process of how to answer problems, and they aren't going to do well in the Common Core because they've learned a procedure with a concept they don't understand. And so it's not about going in the ones column and knocking on the door and borrowing one from my friend. It's what are you doing when you're subtracting 42 minus 5? And so if you can use the chips and the strips as you're going through it, you get kind of that idea. So I'm going to model this as we go through. So 42 minus 25, you would break apart that 10 to subtract, pull out your 5, you would pull out the 20, and then you would have your answer on there. So there's lots of place value discs that are used throughout the program, and one of the things that I really like is Jana's book. It's Why Before How. It uses a lot of these computation strategies, and it would go really well with EngageNY if you are using it because it has a lot of those concepts in it. I'm going to skip through this one, but the same idea of the place value discs. There's also decimal strips that you can use and decimal discs. So same idea that you're acting out problems. A lot of the units in this particular one that I pulled out, I think, is 4th grade. It uses them. They have to represent mixed numbers using the number discs. And so if you don't have those, you're going to need those and know how to use them. So one of the really good trainings that we do, we have a couple trainings at SD that we do that help teachers understand this, which is our Singapore Math Foundations of Number Sense. It really helps you to understand that concrete pictorial abstract portion of this as well as a few modules that we have look at understanding number sense and how we can use these 8 math practices in a way that makes sense for kids. The last one I pulled out, I know we're running short on time, is there are tape diagrams in EngageNY, and many people say to me, Shannon, what are tape diagrams? And what those are model drawings or pictorial representations of how to show the math. And so in this particular 4th grade lesson, it's even used in 3rd grade and in the other grades as well, but it says, solve additive comparison word problems using tape diagrams. So if you are unfamiliar with tape diagrams or model drawings, it is probably one of the best trainings that you could take, is to be able to look at how to do model drawings. But when you have a problem like this, the bakery has 12,674 kilograms of flour. Of that, 1,802 kilograms is whole wheat, 888 kilograms is rice flour. The rest is all-purpose flour. How much all-purpose flour did they use? Solve and check the reasonableness of your answer. I mean, kids look at this and they add or subtract 2 numbers. They don't have a way. So EngageNY embraces the idea of Singapore math and the ideas that are behind model drawings, which they call tape diagrams, which are the same thing. It's just, being able to use a unit to represent that amount. And when kids can learn this way, it really helps them to conceptualize what it is you're doing in a problem. I'm not taking those two numbers and adding and subtracting and doing something and coming up with something, but that I actually understand how to model this problem. I know how to show the problem. I know how to give my answer and tell you whether or not it's reasonable or not, which is really bringing in all those 8 math practices. And so, one of the ones that you could try is, one of the ones in our training is this particular problem. Lydia made some cookies, of which 1/3 of them were chocolate chip. 3/4 of the remainder were ginger snaps, and the rest of them were peanut butter. If Lydia made 4 dozen cookies altogether, how many peanut butter cookies did she make? And so as you're looking at this, it's a little bit complex to solve a problem, like this. And so kids, need to learn how to use this tape diagram. I'm not going to act it out for you. I'm just going to show you kind of my own work of looking at it. But they need to know that they have to label Lydia's cookies and that she had 4 dozen cookies. 1/3 of the cookies were chocolate chip, and the remainder, 3/4 of this remainder were ginger snaps, and the rest of it were peanut butter. What does that look like? Well, we're taking this remainder and making it fourths, and we're going to say that this, 3/4 of it is ginger snaps, and the part that we're actually solving for is right here. When kids can look at a word problem like this and are able to transfer it into, really breaking it down into a model drawing, it makes much more sense to them. And so they have to do the computation of 4 dozen is 48, and my 3 units up here equal 48. So 1 unit, which represents my chocolate chip cookies, is 16. 2 units of my remainder is 32. And so now I have 4 subunits that are left. Those 4 subunits equal to 32. 1 subunit equals 8. And so Lydia has made 8 peanut butter cookies. And so the EngageNY uses a lot of tape diagrams, and I find many teachers that are just, they're not sure how to do those. And so a really great training to have come to your school would be our step-by-step model drawing training or webinar that you can look at to really get the idea of how to do that before you get into it. The book Step-by-Step Model Drawings by Shar is great, and Lorraine Walker, The More Challenging Problems. A lot of schools with EngageNY will use these booklets with their application problems, which has a lot of those things in it as well. I have some things on my website that you can download for free that kind of help you with a format to kind of do model drawings. A lot of my schools that are doing EngageNY actually use this template for all of their application problems when they're doing that. So time goes so fast, even when we're doing a webinar and there's no audience that I can see. But what I wanted to let you know is I have a little coupon for you if you're tuned in today. I have different things on my website, of which I featured a few of them today in our workshop. I'm going to offer 10% off for a week. So if you type in the coupon code STE webinar on my website, you can receive 10% off. One of the popular items is the strategy games because they bring in the 8 math practices. They're really fun and very easy to use with EngageNY. In addition, the subitizing screeners and other things like the counting buddy are on there as well. And so we want with this, to be able to look at if you're getting into a program like EngageNY or whatever program that you're using, just to try to not stress you out so much. It's really important that you know about a lot of these key things, and I think the best way to do that is through job-embedded coaching. We work with hundreds and hundreds of teachers across the United States, and a lot of the trainings that we do at SDE has job-embedded coaching with it, and so that's a really great way to get professional development to come. So I have some resources here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Faulkner for some questions.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. I hope everybody enjoyed today's presentation. We're going to just take a minute or two to let everybody submit any last questions for Shannon via the window on the right-hand side of your screen. In the meantime, I'd like to mention a few things. As a thank you for attending today's webinar, like Shannon did, we'd like to offer you a 10% discount if you register for any seminar or conference by June 22nd and mention VIP code W062214. And in fact, you might be interested in joining Shannon at SDE's upcoming national conferences, both in New Orleans in June and Las Vegas in July. Keep in mind that you can bring Shannon on site to your school or district for customized training, embedded coaching, whatever it is that your school does need in order to help move along with EngageNY. For more information on training or to register for any of our SDE events, give us a call at 877-388-2054. And we'd also like to invite you to follow SDE via social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest using the username SDE4Educators with the number 4. And you can search for us on LinkedIn under Staff Development for Educators. And just a reminder that you will receive a follow-up email within 48 hours that includes a link to a printable certificate of participation for the webinar, as well as a link to the archived recording of the webinar as well. I want to thank you all for your patience. Let's get to the questions while we have a few minutes. And Shannon, first off, we have let me see. We had a question. Do you think that teachers should use sprints time tests to give students practice with facts?
You know, everyone always asks me that question, and it's not that I'm against the Mad Minute thing. I just think that we ask children too early on. You know, there's the sprints that are in there, and, you know, there's not that every program has every perfect thing that, you know, agree with, but I think, you know, subitizing and understanding combinations like the screeners that I've developed are really important. So if you're giving kids and asking them, you know, our daughter is 7 and she's in 2nd grade, and she gets marked down on her report card for not knowing her facts fast, and I really don't care because she has number sense beyond, you know, the explanations that she can give for her mathematical thinking. To me is more important than putting her under stress to answer a question as fast as she can. And if she isn't there yet and her understanding, why isn't she there yet? Is it that it's the stress of the problem, or does she not understand it? And so I think it's important first to look at, you know, some of those kids. And so if it's not appropriate for some of your kids, and your kid's getting 8 of them right, and you're giving them again tomorrow and they have 8 right and they have 8 right and they're never advancing, then that's telling you something. They're not at the fluency level yet for those addition problems. So we need to use that formative information and change our instruction in some way to better meet the needs of that child.
It's interesting you say that, Shannon. I've heard from some of our presenters who've been to Singapore that the way they put it is that they believe that any teacher in Singapore who used time testing would no longer have a job.
I know, it's really against the philosophy of that, and I agree. I just think that, you know, is it making us better at, you know, if you can do your facts fast, if you can explain your reasoning, I mean, that's really what, there isn't going to be anything on a lot of these next generation tests that's going to say, you know, here's the timer. If you can't do it fast enough, you're not good at math, you know.
Mm-hmm. Another question, during concept development, should students be in groups?
You know, in the concepts development, depending on which you know, module you're using or which lesson you're using, it can be flexible. Sometimes you can, you know, there's a lot of activities that kids are doing, you know, and one of the ones I had pulled out when they're looking at 10 frames, the kids have a bag of objects and they're doing things. So a lot of teachers in the younger grades will have some of those concepts will be taught in a mathematical experience where kids will sit at the rug area with their manipulatives and kind of act it out, because you really want to promote conversation. Usually when a child's sitting individually doing some of the tasks that are more hands-on, they aren't really getting the concepts that you're wanting. So it really depends, you know, in the 4th grade, if they're using the fraction tiles or using place value chips and things, you're really wanting to bring in 8 Math Practice 3, which is those constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. So I feel sometimes when you have the kids grouped together for those types of activities, it's better, but there are some concepts that in that concept development section that they'd be better seated at their desk. So it kind of varies, but I am turned more towards the interactive kind of learning because it's really discovery based.
Great. We've got Angela asks, says she loves the poster for the 8 math practices being presented in a kid-friendly way. Is that found on the Common Core State Standards website?
No, actually, I live in Michigan, and that is part of our Wayne RESA. I do a lot of work with our county, and I have permission to share that poster, and so it's actually on my website. So if you go to strategicinterventionsolutions.org and you click on free resources, if you go under it says I think it says 8 Math Practice placemat, and so we use that as a placemat for the kids because it's just real easy to see them all in a glance. You know, I have ones that have I can statements and things, but a lot of times when kids are playing a game like 9 holes, they have to use, I print those off on color, and they have to put a chip on which standard they were using in a game. So they, you know, the kids need to know the language of it, and so I think the little terms at the bottom, talk and explain, you know, those are just much quicker for younger kids in elementary school to understand.
Thank you. We've got a number of people actually who are asking, and I will give you permission, Shannon. Can you swing back to the resources page?
Sure, yep.
Thanks. That'll let people see that for a while. And also, just to remind everybody, the webinar archive, when you receive the link to that, certainly you can watch that over and over again, and pause on this page, write down whatever you need, share this with colleagues as well. And also, at the conclusion of this webinar, whatever questions we didn't get to, I'll actually be sending those to Shannon, and she'll reply with her answers. And also, we'll put those, the Q&A from that, along with these resources. We'll actually post that on the SDE site, along with the link to the archive. So within a week or so, actually, these should all be up there and accessible to everybody who attended the webinar. Let me see. It actually looks like we probably need to call it quits. We do have a few more questions, but unfortunately I think we're out of time. I do want to respect people's time, and I'm sure that they have other things to move on to. Like I said, if we didn't get to your question, we will be posting those Q&As with the webinar archive. When we have those available, we'll let you know via Facebook and Twitter generally. I want to thank Shannon for joining us today. If you would like some more information about the subjects in here, feel free to give us a call. Again, 877-388-2054. We'd love to get into some deeper discussions with you about it. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and that everybody has a great rest of your day. Thanks, Shannon. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks so much.